There's statistics that actually says that every single family that's saved equals a certain amount of money. And so you going after families, not for the good of the family, but for the economic value that comes into your organization.
Hello, and welcome to Unlock the Kingdom Within You. This podcast explores the profound truth about what it means to be born into the kingdom, not a religion. On this podcast, we challenge the religious and denominational norms which shackle us from expressing the liberty of Christ by exploring the kingdom, the Ekklesia, and citizenship. If you're born into the kingdom but lost in religion, then this channel is just for you. So thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.
Well, and to be frank, a lot of that is because of this ideology of full-time ministry that comes in, because you end up with a situation where with a lot of these pastors within churches, constantly have made themselves full-time, which for me, I don't get where that concept comes from, because the kingdom is the kingdom. There's no such thing as full-time. But the reality is they create an impression that to manifest ministry or the kingdom or Christendom, it comes through this method and way. And so people pursue that method and way.
Other thing is that most of these guys who are throwing themselves in that particular frame, then what they do with their churches, the church becomes an economic model. And it is not so much focused on building and pushing things forward. So in that particular world where you are abandoning your calling, because we still assume that calling is locked within a church functionality or church responsibility. You abandon your calling and then you go into what you describe as full-time ministry. And the moment you do that, the church is reduced to an economic model designed to finance some of your own well-being. Now, in doing that, we run into a further problem. And the further problem is that that is what then leads to this myopic brand of evangelism, meaning that I am not so much concerned about populating my civic space and building my kingdom responsibility and engaged in kingdom civics, as it were. What you find yourself doing is focus primarily on populating your world, your little building, for the sake, not for the sake of the individuals who are saved, but people begin to attach almost like a price tag on every member.
Economic value.
That's right. There's statistics that actually says that every single family that's saved equals a certain amount of money. And so you going after families, not for the good of the family, but for the economic value that comes into your organization. And the corruption just seems to just snowball. This thing is just snowballing, getting bigger and bigger as we go along, and it corrupts the whole issue. And so I agree.
It is, and we experienced that. I mean, I think we had within our church, we had legitimate God-centered purposes, good works, but we constantly were tripped up by the fundamental structure in which the church was initially essentially brought together, and the economics within it caused so many issues. But it's a real bind. But again, these are some of the things that the Ekklesia is going to have to flesh out and work through from a perspective of how our communities are built and how commonwealth is managed in our communities.
That's a big task, Frederick, and I know that I know the grace of God has this incredible ability to almost quantum us into a place of accomplishment. I'm going to use the word accomplishment because it tends to suggest that what we do, but the grace of God has this incredible ability to leapfrog us or quantum us into a place of having done it. But what we are describing is a course corrective exercise. And how do you take a whole global movement that has been going down an institutionalized path for 2,000 years, how do you pull that thing off of its current lane onto the lane that would allow God to achieve these objectives? A lot of the things that you are saying and we are talking about in this conversation, they are still the small but very important issues, But the more we talk about the dangers of institutionalized church versus the kingdom versus citizenship versus Ekklesia, I mean, is the more you would expose the frailty of this model, and the more you would understand why we are saying in this conversation, I don't care what you do, that model is injurious to the purpose of God. I've said it on several platforms, and people sometimes accuse me of being too hard, but I say often, and I say it again, and I'm willing to be corrected if I say otherwise. I said, listen, the church in its current form is a clear and present danger to everything that God wants to do on the planet. Everything. This is a clear and present danger. This toxic brand of Christianity is contributing to the morass. Hence, I say what I call religion. Religion is actually trying to give a placebo to correct a disease that we contribute to create. And so what we are looking at, we contribute to that problem. Our perspective, our loyalty to that model contributed to the problem. What we are seeing in the earth today in terms of the exodus, the hemorrhaging, the dissatisfaction, the rate at which human catastrophe is outpacing the relevance of the institution. I mean, there's one problem after another one. Where was this church before this pandemic? Where was the prophetic voice? So what we have is this institution that has lost its relevance in the earth. And it's not that they lost it, they never really were given it. We just assumed that we had it, when God's objective was never this institutionalized model. What he has always been seeking to build, I will build my Ekklesia. We hijacked the process and assumed that, well, we're going to get it done. And what we did is create this problem. And so right now, I think God is trying to wrest his Ekklesia out of the hand of these apostles and prophets and other people, so that he could truly, because it is his own, I would build my Ekklesia. What he wants is to wrest that out of their hands and truly assume ownership, because as you said in this conversation, the moment we step into that kingdom, Ekklesia, citizenship zone, it is no longer the apostle at the top. It is his own, it is God's own. And so we listen and we consistently obey.
I think it's very interesting, isn't it, that you mentioned about the issues of the institution and how that institution would dismantle. I believe fundamentally it dismantles through what's going on in the city-states right now. Because one of the things I'm very clear upon is a lot of those denominational institutions are effectively integrated into the state systems that are existing now.
Wow, yeah.
And so when those systems quake, so do the institutions.
And you know, you're touching a very, very important nerve there, Frederick. That's important nerve. And I want to say something, but I really can't say it because you are basically touching a nerve that speaks very strongly into the current framework of what is being propagated as Christian nationalism. That is a serious conversation of itself, because I agree that the more we bolt our systems onto the institutions and those institutions fall, is the more we are seeing how our own systems are falling apart. It's almost like Revelation is fulfilling itself in terms of come out of her, my people. We are so deep inside of the bowels of Babylon. Really, at the end of the day, you really don't know where Babylon ends and where the church begins. Listen, it's a sad, sad sight. It is a sad sight. We are deep inside of the system. Listen, I was saying recently that that the kingdom is a really, really explosive world. That image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, that speaks to all kinds of stuff, man. That really calls us to rethink our systems, because the rock did not try to influence the system, the structure in front of it. The rock didn't try to make the system of itself, didn't try to make the system more of the rock. The rock crushed it. In other words, if
Yeah.
you understand what the kingdom is on a collision course with the institutions of the earth. And we're not trying to take over the institutions of the earth. We still assume that the kingdom is, well, we're going to take over the institutions of the earth. We're going to take over politics and we're going to take over economics. No, the kingdom is on a collision course with all of these systems. And until
can I just add to insert on that collision course is with all of the byproducts of Adam's humanity, fallen humanity, because it's a composed of two, isn't it? It's the clay and it's the iron, the institutions that have been built.
Because these systems, Frederick, they have not been built by God. You know, when the devil took Jesus upon a high mountain and said, I'll give you all of these kingdoms, the language that is used there is the same language used in the book of Ephesians, when Ephesians talks about that the rulers of this world, the princes of this world, the devil, basically, he is the chief architect of these systems.
Yeah.
What we call education is not a God model. That is part of the system designed by the devil, cosmocracy, that these are systems of the world. God is not concerned about taking over that. He's concerned about removing it. And as long as we have this idea that the kingdom really comes when we take over these 7 mountains, we still seeing that Daniel chapter 2 reality through a blurred lens. The kingdom is not concerned about taking over politics. It's not concerned about taking over education. The kingdom is concerned about building an alternative to these systems, removing it and putting up another system altogether. Now, that's a different conversation. The rock did not try to stand on that image that Nebuchadnezzar saw as the hat at the top of this structure ruling all of it. It moved it. It's a collision course.
And you're right, because when the kingdom began to expand in the fulfillment of that prophecy, what do we find? We find the contention with the institutions in those regions, for example, in Acts, because why? The wealth is being taken away from those institutions in order to build up this new kingdom-led institution, which ultimately is destabilizing everything else at the same time.
Absolutely. You see, that is why, Frederick, I said to you at the beginning, you said that, you know what, people are really gravitating to the kingdom. And I said, I agree, but I still am of the opinion, as long as we continue to think that the kingdom, well, we're going to take over, and we hold to this Christian nationalist perspective, what the kingdom is, that we have to take over and take over. We should not talk that language. We shouldn't talk that right now. What we should be concerned about is, how can we build an alternative economic model? How can we build an alternative education model? How can we build an alternative political model? These are real systems. When the nations come and say, teach us your ways, they're not asking to come and teach us how to sing a song on a Sunday morning.
But can I say that I think the reason why we have a religion cloaked in nationalism, which is essentially, what we would effectively call naturalized Adamic nationalism, wherever it is located. The reason why we have that is because we have not, and we're going back to what we were discussing earlier upon this conversation, it's as if we have not persevered with the revelation to understand that the outcome is citizenship. Because I think that by the time you arrive at citizenship, you have to recognize that the kingdom stands on its own 2 feet. And that actually, it is not, like you said, it is not interested in any allegiance with any other kingdom around it. Right. And so the systems have to be built, have to stand by themselves. And I think the problem is when we look at the last decade or at least 15 years, the revelation of kingdom has not led to the development of the identity of citizenship. In the mind of the person. So being a citizen, if you talk about a kingdom but you're not a citizen of it, then it's a fantasy still. Right. It's a fantasy because there's nothing tangible in your mind that you can identify with that city-state. You can't identify with it, and because you can't identify with it, then it's a figment of imagination, or it's something that is going to happen in the future. It doesn't have any realty or real estate now.
No, I think one of the contributing factor to that lack of patriotism, as it were, and the lack of that let me use the word naturalization. I'm going to use that term conveniently, even though I don't think it is a correct kingdom term, because we're not naturalized, we are being spiritualized, I think is a more appropriate term. And so part of our problem is that we are still too loyal to our earthly cultures, because the kingdom does not allow for dual citizenship. The moment you step into the kingdom, think about a naturalization process. Stepping into the kingdom is not stepping into a religious world. It's not a new way to see the Bible. It's not some new perspective on a ooh and ah. The kingdom is literally a nation. It's a city-state. It's a system of life where God is the governor, the king, and the ruler of that particular zone. You enter into that world, it is as though you rip your passport up from this life and you become a naturalized citizen of that world. Part of
which we would say is a circumcision of heart. That is the basis of that.
Absolutely.
It's a process. It's a process of birth. Yeah.
And when that occurs, then your loyalty to your human earth-based systems basically is abandoned, and you live with a brand new, newly defined patriotism, which is something that is far removed from our operation. Now, part of what I think, we talk about this need for us to kind of course correct this whole initiative. Something I was talking to a group recently about this whole issue of what is called natal homing. It is something that animals have. Natal homing is this internal pulsation that connects them to home. They want to go home. They have this longing to return to source, to return to the base from which they were born. They want to get back to the environment where they were shaped and formed, where they were spawned. And I think that's a critical part of our process, because I think that we have left our natal home and we have drifted into all kinds of different worlds and zones. And we have lost ourselves in religion, and we lost here, we lost there. Somehow, like the salmon, the moment it becomes mature, that natal homing switches on, and it's like, let me go home. If I die there, I'm fine. If I am disintegrated there, I am fine. And they said that there's something within animals who subscribe to that natal homing system that they are willing to undergo what is necessary, whatever is necessary, in order to get there. And if you have to put that in the context of transitioning, if you put that in the context of course correcting, you put that in the context of kingdomizing, you put that in the context of citizenship, kingdom citizenship, that's a critical part, because we cannot redefine our civic duties, our kingdom civics, for want of another term. We can't define our patriotic responsibilities. We cannot define our kingdom responsibilities if we continue to meander in all kinds of different cultures and being defined by those cultures. Somehow, something has to happen inside of us that says, I want to go home. I want to more or less identify with that which gave me my identity and my personhood and my sense of being and my reason for existence. And until that happens, we would still be meandering and floating through life, doing a bunch of religious stuff that looks like God, pretending to be kingdom. But there's something that I am so deeply concerned about, the whole issue of just re-Edening this whole process, going back to that particular process.
I think one of the beautiful things that I think comes into this, which is, it feels to me, is the culmination of this re-identification process, for want of a better word, is this idea where it's no longer necessarily about how you identify with God. It's rather, he said, I can identify with you because I finished the process. Right. You see that in the called out process from throughout all the patriarchs.
Right.
There's a point where he's called them out. There's a point where they're wrestling in that entire journey. And then there's a point where he says, yeah, I can identify with that. That's now an archetype. That now is it's a point on the earth that I can literally point people to and locate people and say, yeah, that's me. That's what it looks like in that time, space, and matter.
Right.
You know, and I think that for us, that when you're talking about that homing, like a homing pigeon, homing pigeon in terms of returning back, it's returning back to that place where it only matters about what God has to say about his identification with you, because he has finished the work that he started and wanted to complete.
And that's the truth. That's the truth. The thing about homing is that it has so many distractions along the way. But if we really align ourselves with that natal homing, as I described it, distractions are not distracting, because you are so fixated, so focused, so driven, that you could flash whatever looks attractive on this side. It doesn't appeal to me. Flash whatever is attractive, doesn't appeal to me. But I also want to connect with what you said there about the whole sense of God identifying with our efforts, because Hebrews does in fact talk about that. It says, God is not ashamed to be called their God. To me, that is God identifying with the efforts of the patriarchs. He called them out, set them on a journey, and he is now identifying with that process, almost like taking ownership of that process and saying, well, I am not ashamed. The flip side of that is God saying almost like, I'm ashamed. Don't call my name. Don't associate me with your stuff. I am ashamed to be associated with your stuff. Don't put my brand on that stuff. Please don't associate me with what you're doing there. I had nothing to do with that. That has nothing to do with me. But if it's done right, God takes ownership of the exercise. He is not ashamed to be called their God. And I think that makes the whole process worthwhile and absolutely enjoyable. It's been good, man.
And I think that it is. I think that's a great way to close. But I think what that does as well is that's something that we can come together on.
Absolutely.
That's something we can come together, because it's the pinnacle of our relationship with the Father, isn't it?
To be honest with you, I really don't think that any one of us could walk in that reality, because observe, it says, therefore God is not ashamed to be called their, plural,
their God. Yeah.
God did not say, well, I'm not ashamed to be called one person, because each of these patriarchs, no matter what they were doing, they were all basically converging into a single objective that God was after, in him working in each one of them individually. And that's why it is so important that we break out of our silos and that we get rid of all this nonsense, man. And it has so many good initiatives and good people who are standing on the outside pointing a finger and criticizing. Some of them would forever want your past to be the present. Some of them would forever want to condemn and criticize. And that's the truth. Some people only see you in the context of your failings, only see you in the context of your compromise. They will never see you in the context of your rehabilitation. Listen, there's so many perspectives that I would have gone through over the years that shaped my understanding of life. And in shaping my understanding of life, it recalibrates the way in which I defer, respect, regard, and anticipate. I tell people, listen, I've grown accustomed to, I become a ninja. I anticipate people's move in advance. I know exactly what they will do and how they'll do it, because human beings, Homo sapiens, man, chivalry with a knife held behind their back is their normal. Chivalry with a knife held behind their back. These things, man, until we could break free from those petty issues, that statement by God, he's not ashamed to be called their God. It's a plural initiative. Your work, my work, other people's work, from Indonesia to Timbuktu. It's a matter of dovetailing that, because Zechariah's sight was, this is how the city of God will look. Jerusalem would be built like wall-less villages. Wall-less. It has no walls. I could freely walk from my world into yours and vice versa. But as long as we build perimeters and say, this is my kingdom and my network and my church and my operation and my vision, is the more we are taking ownership of something that is God's. And that is where, again, we are deep inside of the Malachi morass, which is, you're bringing that which is stolen. It is not yours. It's stolen.
I think it gets me thinking about the fact of why it's so important to step away from titling everything, whether it's your community, your ministry, all of that stuff. I mean, I certainly, for me, I feel certainly in the last few years even more grateful and thankful to God for being able to because I don't put it down to myself, but being able to at least step in the right direction to say, no, I'm not going to put names on these things. These things need to remain, in a sense, nameless in order to, I think, open the way for which the formation of Christ can be achieved. I think I've always said, as soon as we begin to name things inappropriately, especially if they're not called out of function, but if we begin to name things inappropriately, we hinder the formation of Christ. And in fact, what we do is we end up supporting the development of the caricature rather than the character of Christ in it. And so there's something to be said about saying, well, these are, there's a scripture that talks about they run along the cities, they run along the walls. It's these. It doesn't talk about them in the context, and I'm going to the point you made about the plural element. It doesn't talk about in the context of individuals. It talks about them in the context of this, what it seems like on earth, this nameless people, but actually they're named in heaven. This is idea that because they're identifying from a different source, they don't need the restrictions of labels and titles and names to define them that would come from an earthly perspective. And there's something to be said about the fact that, for me, I'll always go back to citizenship on this, that I'm excited about the fact that anyone in our community, which is based on a locality, can go anywhere into any community, because citizenship is the fundamental thing that connects everybody. That's for me so exciting, because I can only see Commonwealth move that way. As soon as you don't have citizenship and in its place is a denominational label or a network label, automatically Commonwealth is cut off.
Right. Because I think
and hierarchy is created.
And in that world, what we've created is a Christian apartheid. You basically, you basically divide people into different cliques and groupings. Well, Pentecost, and it goes in all kinds of ways. And I personally believe that the titling and the labeling feeds our deficiencies. It feeds our incompetence. It feeds our issues, man. Lack of identity and all of that stuff. Because the people who grab after these titles very often are the ones who are so vacant in the inside that they have to more or less kind of use their titles to showcase something that they lack inside. I personally don't care about none of that. I don't care. That's one of my favorite lines. I'm not wearing one of my normal rebel hat.
Especially when we know that they're still trying to figure things out anyway. To define yourself so soon and to put something on you so soon when actually you've not figured things out is remarkably ignorant anyway. But you know what? I think this has been a great combo, and I'm looking at the time and going, wow, it's gone so quickly. But this is going to be a precursor to many conversations. Oh no, absolutely. I mean, what my plan is really straightforward, and that is obviously to bring most of the guys from the collaborative team onto the podcast to get these conversations happening. And then that opens up to what I discussed with you about sort of nation builder roundtables. Nice. So I can bring in more people into the conversation. And obviously behind that, then begin obviously to share all of our resources with people so that people have access and they're able to sort of begin to start taking the journey. So I want to say thank you so much for being joining on the podcast. I know people are going to get value from it. There's no doubt about that. Anyway, I mean, every time you're on a YouTube, I think you're becoming infamously known. But you know what? That's what a disruptor does.
Yeah, and that was none of my doing. As a matter of fact, left to me, I would be in a cave. But you know what? Those days have come and gone.
You're called out of the cave.
Yeah, man, we'll have the websites up. We'll have the books pushing out now. Websites, books. We're gonna get the app out, everything out there. So those of you who already have too much of me, watch out. You're gonna get a lot more.
Yeah, there's gonna be a lot more.
Yeah, man. Frederick.
Well, listen.
Let me tell you thanks, man. I mean, I really appreciate the value that you bring to me, bro, and the sight and the angle of sight that you have. It expands me, and it is a real joy to have you as a friend and to name you as a friend in my world. So thank you. Thank you, man.
No, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thank you for joining our fireside talk about the kingdom. My name is Frederick Tobun, and I hope this podcast has been a blessing to you. If you'd like to continue to receive fresh insight into the kingdom, click the notification bell to follow us. For further information about the kingdom, visit our website www.unlockthekingdomwithinyou.com to download your free ebook. See you soon.